Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that a particular school district in Alabama is struggling to meet the objectives outlined in the state's curriculum standards. Which of the following approaches best addresses this challenge while ensuring compliance with Alabama education law? Option A. Permit teachers to develop their own unique curriculum frameworks, allowing for significant deviations from the state standards, provided they believe these alternative approaches are more engaging for students. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of current instructional materials and teaching methodologies to assess their alignment with Alabama's curriculum standards, followed by the implementation of targeted professional development for educators to address identified gaps. Option C. Distribute the official Alabama curriculum standards documents to all teachers and expect them to independently integrate the content into their lesson plans without further guidance or training. Option D. Immediately adopt a suite of new, commercially available curriculum resources that promise innovative teaching methods, without first verifying their alignment with Alabama's specific learning objectives. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of current instructional materials and teaching methodologies to assess their alignment with Alabama's curriculum standards, followed by the implementation of targeted professional development for educators to address identified gaps. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate the implementation of Alabama's curriculum standards. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the mandated state curriculum with the practical realities of diverse student needs and teacher capacity within local school districts. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while fostering effective instruction. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of existing instructional materials and pedagogical strategies to determine alignment with Alabama's curriculum standards, followed by targeted professional development for educators. This is correct because Alabama law mandates adherence to the state-approved curriculum framework. Furthermore, effective implementation necessitates that educators understand the standards and possess the skills to teach them. Investing in professional development directly addresses potential gaps in teacher knowledge or practice, ensuring that the curriculum is not just present, but also effectively delivered to all students. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide a high-quality education. An incorrect approach involves prioritizing the adoption of new, unvetted curriculum materials solely based on their perceived novelty or marketing appeal, without a thorough assessment of their alignment with Alabama's standards or their suitability for the district's student population. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement of implementing the state-mandated curriculum and risks introducing materials that do not adequately cover the required content or skills. Another incorrect approach is to assume that simply distributing the state curriculum documents to teachers constitutes adequate implementation. This overlooks the critical need for pedagogical training and support. Teachers require more than just access to documents. They need to understand the underlying principles, learning objectives, and effective instructional methods for each standard. This approach neglects the professional development aspect essential for successful curriculum delivery and is therefore a regulatory and ethical failure. Finally, an incorrect approach is to allow individual teachers complete autonomy to deviate significantly from the state curriculum standards based on personal preference, without any oversight or justification. While some flexibility is often beneficial, wholesale disregard for the established framework undermines the state's commitment to a consistent educational experience across Alabama and fails to ensure that all students are exposed to the core knowledge and skills deemed essential by the state. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, Alabama's curriculum standards. This should be followed by an assessment of current practices and resources, identifying any discrepancies or areas for improvement. Next, potential solutions should be evaluated based on their alignment with both regulatory mandates and best pedagogical practices, considering the needs of students and the capacity of educators. Finally, implementation should be accompanied by ongoing evaluation and support to ensure sustained effectiveness. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that a student in an Alabama public school who has an individualized education program, EAP, for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, has engaged in a pattern of disruptive behavior in class, culminating in an incident where the student refused to follow instructions and verbally confronted a teacher. The school administration is initiating a manifestation determination review, MDR. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Alabama's special education law and best practices for conducting an MDR? Option A. Conduct a brief meeting with the student's general education teacher to gather their perspective on the incident, and then make a determination based on that teacher's assessment of the student's behavior. Option B. Convene a review team comprising the student's special education teacher, a school psychologist knowledgeable about the student's disability, and the student's parents, to review all available documentation, including evaluation data, parental input observations, and the student's current IEP, to determine if the behavior was caused by, or had a direct and substantial relationship to, the student's ADHD, or if it was a direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. Option C. Immediately suspend the student for 5 days pending a full investigation, and then schedule the MDR after the suspension period has concluded. Option D. Proceed with disciplinary consequences as outlined in the student handbook, assuming the disruptive behavior is not related to the student's disability, and inform the parents of the disciplinary action taken. The correct answer is B. Convene a review team comprising the student's special education teacher, a school psychologist knowledgeable about the student's disability, and the student's parents, to review all available documentation, including evaluation data, parental input observations, and the student's current IEP, to determine if the behavior was caused by, or had a direct and substantial relationship to, the student's ADHD, or if it was a direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires school administrators in Alabama to navigate the complex requirements of a manifestation determination review, MDR, while ensuring the student's rights and the integrity of the disciplinary process are upheld. The challenge lies in balancing the need for accountability with the legal obligation to determine if a student's behavior was a manifestation of their disability. Misinterpreting the legal standards or failing to follow the prescribed procedures can lead to legal challenges, undermine parental trust, and negatively impact the student's educational experience. Careful judgment is required to ensure the review is fair, thorough, and compliant with Alabama's specific interpretation of federal special education law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves convening a review team that includes individuals knowledgeable about the student, the meaning of the disability, and the student's behavior, as well as the implications of the behavior in relation to the student's IEP and placement. This team must review all relevant information, including evaluation and diagnostic results, information provided by parents, observations of the student, and the student's current IEP. The review must specifically consider whether the student's behavior was caused by, or had a direct and substantial relationship to, the student's disability, or if the behavior was the direct result of the school's failure to implement the student's IEP. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the procedural safeguards and substantive requirements for MDRs as outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, as implemented in Alabama. The inclusion of knowledgeable individuals and the comprehensive review of relevant documentation are critical to making a legally sound determination. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the observations of the teacher who reported the incident, without involving other team members or reviewing the student's IEP. This fails to meet the requirement of a multidisciplinary review and ignores the crucial context of the student's disability and their individualized education program. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the behavior was not a manifestation simply because it was disruptive, without conducting the thorough review of all relevant information, including parental input and the student's disability. This bypasses the core purpose of the MDR, which is to determine the relationship between the disability and the behavior. A third incorrect approach would be to proceed with disciplinary action based on a preliminary assessment before the formal MDR is completed and a determination is made. This violates the stay put provision and the procedural protections afforded to students with disabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach MDRs by first understanding the specific legal framework governing special education in Alabama. This involves recognizing that an MDR is a procedural safeguard designed to protect students with disabilities. The decision-making process should be structured around the legal requirements, convening the appropriate team, gathering all necessary documentation, and systematically analyzing the evidence to determine the relationship between the disability and the behavior. When faced with challenging behaviors, professionals must resist the urge to make snap judgments and instead commit to a thorough, evidence-based review process that respects the student's rights and ensures compliance with Alabama's special education laws. Question 3. System analysis indicates that a student at an Alabama public high school has created and distributed flyers containing political commentary critical of a local school board policy. Some students and staff have expressed discomfort with the flyer's tone, while others have defended the student's right to express their views. What is the most appropriate course of action for the school administration to take regarding the student's expression? Option A. Allow the student to continue distributing the flyers without any intervention, regardless of any potential impact on the school environment. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the flyer's content and context, assessing whether the expression substantially disrupts the educational environment, infringes on the rights of others, or is lewd, vulgar, or plainly offensive before determining any disciplinary action. Option C. Issue a school-wide announcement discouraging students from engaging in political commentary that could cause discomfort among peers or staff. Option D. Immediately confiscate all copies of the flyers and suspend the student for a period of 5 days for creating disruptive materials. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the flyer's content and context, assessing whether the expression substantially disrupts the educational environment, infringes on the rights of others, or is lewd, vulgar, or plainly offensive before determining any disciplinary action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama's public education system, where a student's right to express themselves clashes with the school's responsibility to maintain an orderly and safe learning environment. The professional challenge lies in balancing these competing interests, ensuring that disciplinary actions are fair, non-discriminatory, and align with established Alabama law and school board policies, particularly concerning student speech and expression. Misinterpreting or misapplying these principles can lead to legal challenges, damage to the school's reputation, and a negative impact on student morale and educational outcomes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the student's expression against the established legal standards for student speech in Alabama. This approach requires understanding that students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate, as established by federal precedent, but that these rights are subject to reasonable limitations within the school setting. Specifically in Alabama, school officials can restrict student speech if it substantially disrupts the educational environment, infringes on the rights of others, or is lewd, vulgar, or plainly offensive. Therefore, the correct approach is to gather all relevant facts, consider the specific content and context of the expression, and evaluate its potential impact on the school community before taking any disciplinary action. This ensures that any action taken is narrowly tailored, serves a legitimate educational purpose, and is consistent with Alabama's legal framework governing student conduct and expression. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately imposing severe disciplinary measures based solely on the perceived offensiveness of the expression, without a proper investigation. This fails to acknowledge the student's right to expression and bypasses the necessary legal analysis to determine if the expression crosses the line into unprotected speech under Alabama law. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the expression entirely, assuming it is protected speech, without considering its potential for substantial disruption or infringement on others' rights. This neglects the school's responsibility to maintain a safe and effective learning environment. Finally, an approach that applies disciplinary measures inconsistently, targeting certain students or types of expression while overlooking others, violates principles of equal protection and fairness, and is not supported by Alabama's educational regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama's education system should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes due process and legal compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the student's rights to freedom of expression under federal and state law. 2. Assessing the specific context and content of the student's expression. 3. Evaluating whether the expression causes substantial disruption, infringes on the rights of others, or falls into categories of unprotected speech. G. Lewd, vulgar, plainly offensive. 4. Consulting relevant school board policies and legal counsel when necessary. 5. Applying disciplinary measures that are proportionate, consistent, and serve a legitimate educational purpose. This systematic approach ensures that student rights are respected while maintaining a conducive learning environment. Question 4. System analysis indicates a high school student in Alabama creates and distributes flyers on school grounds advocating for a change in the school's dress code policy. The flyers are critical of the current policy, but do not contain profanity, incite violence, or disrupt classes. The school principal, believing the flyers are disrespectful and could undermine school authority, confiscates them and suspends the student. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and legal obligations of the school administration in Alabama? Option A. Allow the distribution of the flyers only if they are approved by the administration beforehand, regardless of their content or disruptive potential. Option B. Prohibit the distribution of any student-generated material that criticizes school policies to maintain order and respect for authority. Option C. Confiscate the flyers and suspend the student immediately because the expression is critical of school policy and could be perceived as disrespectful. Option D. Allow the student to distribute the flyers as they do not substantially disrupt the educational environment or infringe on the rights of others, and engage in a dialogue with the student about the dress code policy if appropriate. Correct answer is D. Allow the student to distribute the flyers as they do not substantially disrupt the educational environment or infringe on the rights of others, and engage in a dialogue with the student about the dress code policy if appropriate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for school administrators in Alabama due to the delicate balance between maintaining an orderly educational environment and upholding students' fundamental right to free speech, as protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and interpreted through landmark Supreme Court cases. The challenge lies in discerning when student expression crosses the line from protected speech to conduct that substantially disrupts the educational mission or infringes upon the rights of others. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreach that stifles legitimate expression and underreach that permits disruption. The best professional practice involves a nuanced approach that prioritizes the protection of student speech, unless it meets the stringent legal standards for restriction. This means administrators should first assess whether the student's expression is disruptive or infringes on the rights of others, considering the specific context of the school environment. If the expression is not substantially disruptive and does not infringe on others' rights, it should be permitted. If it is potentially disruptive, the administrator should engage in a dialogue with the student to understand the nature of the expression and explore less restrictive alternatives to outright prohibition. This approach aligns with the principles established in Tinker v. Des Moines, which holds that student expression is protected unless it substantially disrupts the educational environment or invades the rights of others. Alabama schools are bound by these federal constitutional principles. An incorrect approach would be to prohibit the student's expression solely because it is unpopular, controversial, or expresses a viewpoint that the administration disagrees with. This fails to recognize that the First Amendment protects even offensive or unpopular speech. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately impose disciplinary action without first attempting to understand the nature and potential impact of the expression, or without considering whether less restrictive measures could address any perceived disruption. This bypasses the necessary balancing test and can lead to arbitrary enforcement. Finally, assuming that any expression critical of school policy automatically constitutes a substantial disruption is an oversimplification that ignores the protected nature of student dissent within the educational setting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a presumption in favor of student speech. They must then apply the established legal tests, such as the substantial disruption test from Tinker, to evaluate the expression's impact. This involves gathering facts, considering the specific school context, and engaging in open communication with the student. If restrictions are deemed necessary, they must be narrowly tailored and serve a legitimate pedagogical interest, always seeking the least restrictive means to address any disruption. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates concerns regarding the content of articles submitted for publication in the Northport High School student newspaper, a publication sponsored by the school and funded through the school's budget. The principal, after a cursory review, believes some articles are controversial and could provoke debate among students and parents. What is the most appropriate course of action for the principal to take under Alabama education law, considering the principles established in Hazelwood School District v. Kuhlmeyer? Option A. Prohibit the publication of any article that expresses a viewpoint contrary to the school administration's or the school board's stated positions to maintain a unified message. Option B. Immediately remove all controversial articles from the newspaper to prevent any potential parental or community backlash, regardless of their content or educational value. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of each article to determine if it is reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns, considering whether the content is vulgar, lewd, or substantially disruptive to the educational environment, and consult Northport High School's specific policies on student publications. Option D. Allow all submitted articles to be published as written, without any editorial oversight, to ensure maximum student freedom of expression, even if some content is potentially offensive or disruptive. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of each article to determine if it is reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns, considering whether the content is vulgar, lewd, or substantially disruptive to the educational environment, and consult Northport High School's specific policies on student publications. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for school administrators in Alabama due to the delicate balance between student expression rights and the school's responsibility to maintain an orderly and effective educational environment, as interpreted by the Supreme Court in Hazelwood School District v. Kuhlmeyer. The core of the challenge lies in determining when student speech in a school-sponsored context can be regulated without infringing upon First Amendment protections. Careful judgment is required to avoid both censorship and disruption. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the content in question, considering its potential to disrupt the educational mission, and consulting relevant Alabama school board policies and legal precedents. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the Hazelwood Standard, which allows schools to exercise editorial control over student speech in school-sponsored publications or activities when the speech is reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns. This includes ensuring that the content is not vulgar, lewd, or offensive, and that it does not undermine the school's educational objectives. By engaging in a careful, policy-aligned review, administrators can make informed decisions that respect student expression while upholding their duty to the school community. An incorrect approach would be to immediately censor the material based solely on a subjective dislike of its viewpoint or a fear of potential controversy, without a clear connection to disruption or pedagogical concerns. This fails to acknowledge the limited scope of school authority over student speech as defined by Hazelwood, and could lead to an unconstitutional prior restraint. Another incorrect approach is to allow the publication of material that is demonstrably disruptive to the educational environment or that contains vulgar or lewd content, without any attempt at editorial review. This disregards the school's legitimate interest in maintaining order and appropriateness within its sponsored activities, which is a key consideration under Hazelwood. Finally, an approach that relies on arbitrary enforcement of vague rules, or that fails to provide students with clear guidelines on acceptable content for school-sponsored publications, is also professionally unacceptable. This creates an environment of uncertainty and can lead to discriminatory application of policies, undermining fairness and due process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific context of the student expression, identifying the relevant school policies and legal standards, like Hazelwood, and engaging in a reasoned, objective evaluation of the content's potential impact on the educational environment and pedagogical goals before making any decisions about its publication or restriction. Question 6. Compliance review shows that the principal of a public high school in Mobile County, Alabama, has proposed a disciplinary action for a student that, while seemingly consistent with the school's written disciplinary policy, may conflict with recent interpretations of student rights in disciplinary proceedings as articulated by Alabama state court rulings. Superintendent of the Mobile County School District needs to determine the most appropriate course of action. Option A. Consult with the district's legal counsel to research and analyze relevant Alabama state court rulings concerning student discipline and parental notification, and then base the disciplinary decision on this legal guidance and the district's policy. Option B. Proceed with the disciplinary action as recommended by the principal, assuming the school's existing policy is sufficient and supersedes any potential conflicts with less recent or less directly applicable court decisions. Option C. Seek informal advice from experienced principals within the district regarding similar past situations to guide the decision-making process without formal legal consultation. Option D. Implement the disciplinary action immediately to address the student's behavior and address any potential legal challenges if they arise later. The correct answer is A. Consult with the district's legal counsel to research and analyze relevant Alabama state court rulings concerning student discipline and parental notification, and then base the disciplinary decision on this legal guidance and the district's policy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the complex interplay between a school district's internal policies, parental rights, and the potential for legal challenges stemming from state court rulings that interpret educational law. The superintendent must balance the immediate need to address a specific student's situation with the broader implications for the entire district's compliance with Alabama law. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is legally sound, ethically defensible, and upholds the educational rights of all students. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the relevant Alabama state court rulings that have established precedents regarding student discipline and parental notification. This approach prioritizes understanding the legal landscape as interpreted by the state's judiciary, which directly informs how the district must operate. By consulting with the district's legal counsel and examining specific case law, the superintendent can ensure that the proposed disciplinary action aligns with established legal standards and minimizes the risk of a successful legal challenge. This proactive legal analysis is crucial for maintaining compliance with Alabama education law and protecting the district from potential litigation. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the school's existing disciplinary policy, without considering how recent state court rulings might have modified or clarified the application of that policy. While internal policies are important, they must be interpreted and applied in light of controlling state law. Failing to do so could lead to actions that, while consistent with the written policy, are ultimately found to be unlawful by an Alabama court. Another incorrect approach would be to implement the disciplinary action without any legal review, assuming the policy is sufficient. This bypasses the critical step of ensuring legal compliance and exposes the district to significant risk. State court rulings often provide nuanced interpretations of statutes and constitutional provisions that may not be immediately apparent from a policy document alone. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over legal accuracy, such as making a decision based on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of non-legal staff, would be professionally unacceptable. Such an approach disregards the established legal framework and the potential for serious legal repercussions, demonstrating a failure to uphold the superintendent's duty to ensure lawful operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue, then researching and understanding the applicable legal and regulatory framework, specifically focusing on how state courts have interpreted relevant laws. This should be followed by consultation with legal counsel to assess risks and ensure compliance. Finally, decisions should be implemented with clear communication and documentation, ensuring all actions are legally defensible and ethically sound. Question 7. The evaluation methodology shows a potential discrepancy in identifying students for special education services within an Alabama public school. A student, referred by their teacher due to persistent academic struggles and behavioral concerns, has undergone a series of assessments. The school psychologist administered a standardized IQ test and a behavioral rating scale. The special education teacher reviewed the student's grades and attendance records. The principal, after reviewing these limited inputs, suggests that the student's difficulties are likely due to a lack of parental involvement and therefore does not warrant further formal evaluation for a disability. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Alabama's eligibility and evaluation processes for special education? Option A. Convene an individualized education program, EAP, team meeting including parents, to review all gathered data, conduct further assessments as needed, and collaboratively determine if the student meets the criteria for a disability under Alabama Administrative Code Chapter 290-8-9. Option B. Proceed with a formal diagnosis of a specific disability based solely on the IQ test results and behavioral rating scale, without further input or team deliberation. Option C. Inform the parents that due to the principal's conclusion, no further evaluation will be conducted, and suggest they seek private tutoring to address the student's academic and behavioral issues. Option D. Accept the principal's assessment that parental involvement is the sole cause of the student's struggles and close the case without further evaluation, as this is a common reason for academic underachievement. The correct answer is A. Convene an individualized education program, EAP, team meeting, including parents, to review all gathered data, conduct further assessments as needed, and collaboratively determine if the student meets the criteria for a disability under Alabama Administrative Code Chapter 290-8-9. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical juncture in ensuring fair and equitable access to educational opportunities within Alabama's public school system. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's specific eligibility criteria for special education services, balancing the need for timely intervention with the imperative of thorough and accurate assessment. Misinterpreting or misapplying these criteria can lead to significant delays in support for students who need it, or conversely, to the misidentification of students, diverting resources and potentially stigmatizing individuals. Careful judgment is required to navigate the legal mandates and ethical obligations to all students. The best approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted evaluation process that adheres strictly to the Alabama Administrative Code, AC, Chapter 290-8-9, specifically concerning the identification and placement of students with disabilities. This methodology would involve gathering information from multiple sources, including parental input, classroom observations, academic records, and standardized assessments administered by qualified personnel. Crucially, it would require the formation of an individualized education program EAP team, as mandated by AAC 290-8-9. 021, to collaboratively review all data and determine if a student meets the criteria for one of the state-defined disability categories. This approach is correct because it aligns with the legal framework's emphasis on a holistic, team-based decision-making process that ensures all relevant factors are considered before a determination is made, thereby safeguarding the student's right to a free, appropriate public education, FAPE, under Alabama law. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a single diagnostic test administered by a school psychologist without consulting with parents or other educators. This fails to meet the comprehensive evaluation requirements outlined in AAC 290-8-9. 032, which necessitates the use of technically sound instruments that may be used for diagnostic purposes and information gathering, but not for determining eligibility alone. Such a singular focus risks overlooking crucial contextual information and can lead to an inaccurate determination. Another unacceptable approach would be to deny an evaluation based on a teacher's subjective opinion that a student is simply not trying hard enough, without initiating the formal referral and evaluation process. Alabama law, as reflected in AAC 290-8-9. 031, requires that a referral for evaluation be initiated if a student is suspected of having a disability. Ignoring such suspicions and failing to follow the established referral protocol is a direct violation of procedural safeguards and deprives the student of their right to a timely and appropriate assessment. Finally, an approach that prioritizes administrative convenience over student needs, such as delaying evaluations due to a backlog of cases without a clear plan for addressing the backlog and ensuring timely services, is ethically and legally unsound. While resource management is important, it cannot supersede the statutory and regulatory requirements for prompt evaluation and the provision of FAPE as stipulated by Alabama law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the Alabama Administrative Code governing special education. When faced with a potential need for evaluation, the first step is to initiate the referral process. This should be followed by assembling the appropriate IEP team, gathering comprehensive data from diverse sources, and engaging in collaborative discussion to determine eligibility based on established criteria. Throughout this process, open communication with parents and adherence to timelines are paramount. Question 8. In Alabama, following the Every Student Succeeds Act ESSA framework, how should a school district best approach the allocation of resources and the development of improvement strategies when disaggregated data reveals significant achievement gaps among various student subgroups, such as students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students? Option A. Implement interventions based on national trends in educational reform that appear promising, without a detailed analysis of how these trends align with Alabama's specific ESSA implementation or the district's unique subgroup data. Option B. Focus primarily on improving the overall district average test scores by implementing broad-based academic support programs that benefit all students, without specific emphasis on subgroup performance. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of Alabama's approved ESSA state plan and relevant state Board of Education regulations. Analyze disaggregated student subgroup performance data to identify specific areas of need, and develop targeted, evidence-based interventions aligned with these findings and state priorities. Option D. Prioritize interventions that are easily implemented with existing resources and staff, regardless of whether they are specifically designed to address the identified disparities in subgroup performance. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of Alabama's approved ESSA state plan and relevant state Board of Education regulations. Analyze disaggregated student subgroup performance data to identify specific areas of need, and develop targeted, evidence-based interventions aligned with these findings and state priorities. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires school districts in Alabama to balance the federal mandates of the Every Student Succeeds Act ESSA with the specific needs and priorities of their local student populations. ESSA, while providing a framework for accountability and improvement, allows for significant state and local flexibility. Navigating this flexibility requires careful consideration of how to best allocate resources and design interventions that are both compliant and effective, particularly when faced with differing performance data across student subgroups. The best approach involves a comprehensive analysis of Alabama's specific ESSA state plan and relevant state Board of Education regulations. This approach prioritizes understanding the federal requirements as interpreted and implemented by Alabama, then examining the disaggregated data for each student subgroup within the district. By identifying specific areas of underperformance for particular groups, the district can then develop targeted, evidence-based interventions that align with both ESSA goals of equity and the state's approved strategies. This method ensures that resource allocation is data-driven, legally compliant with Alabama's ESSA implementation, and directly addresses the identified needs of vulnerable student populations, fostering equitable educational opportunities as intended by ESSA. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on overall district performance without disaggregating data by student subgroup. This fails to address the core equity concerns embedded within ESSA, which mandates attention to the needs of historically underserved students. Such an approach risks perpetuating achievement gaps by not identifying or intervening in the specific challenges faced by subgroups. Another incorrect approach would be to implement generic, one-size-fits-all interventions that are not tailored to the specific needs identified through disaggregated data. While seemingly proactive, these interventions may not be evidence-based for the particular challenges faced by certain subgroups and may not align with the evidence-based practices prioritized by Alabama's ESSA plan, thus failing to achieve the desired outcomes and potentially misallocating resources. Finally, an approach that prioritizes interventions based on readily available resources or popular trends without a thorough analysis of disaggregated data and alignment with Alabama's ESSA plan is also flawed. This method risks implementing programs that are not effective for the identified needs or are not compliant with federal and state requirements, undermining the purpose of ESSA. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the governing regulatory landscape, Alabama's ESSA plan, and state board regulations. This should be followed by a rigorous data analysis, specifically disaggregating performance data by student subgroup. Based on this analysis, the district should then identify evidence-based interventions that are aligned with both federal and state requirements and are most likely to address the identified disparities. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of these interventions are crucial to ensure their effectiveness and compliance. Question 9. To address the challenge of identifying all eligible children with disabilities within its jurisdiction, what proactive measures must a public school district in Alabama implement to fulfill its child find obligations, particularly concerning children not currently enrolled in public school? Option A. Primarily rely on parents or guardians to initiate the evaluation process by formally requesting special education services for their child. Option B. Require a pre-existing formal diagnosis from a private medical or psychological professional before initiating any district-led evaluation for a suspected disability. Option C. Limit child find efforts to only those children who are currently enrolled in the public school district's programs. Option D. Establish a comprehensive system of universal screening and referral processes that actively seeks out and evaluates children suspected of having a disability, including those attending private schools, who are homeless or are wards of the state and are not currently receiving special education services. The correct answer is D. Establish a comprehensive system of universal screening and referral processes that actively seeks out and evaluates children suspected of having a disability, including those attending private schools, who are homeless or are wards of the state and are not currently receiving special education services. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires school personnel to balance the mandate of identifying all eligible children with disabilities with the need to respect parental rights and privacy, while also ensuring efficient and effective use of limited resources. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests and adhere strictly to Alabama's child find requirements. The best professional practice involves a proactive and systematic approach to identifying children who may need special education services. This includes implementing comprehensive screening and referral processes that are accessible to all children within the school district's jurisdiction, regardless of their current enrollment status. Specifically, this approach mandates that school districts actively seek out and evaluate children who are suspected of having a disability and are not currently receiving special education services. This aligns directly with the Alabama Administrative Code, Chapter 290-8-9, which outlines the state's commitment to ensuring that all children with disabilities residing in Alabama, from birth through age 21, who are in need of special education and related services, are identified, located, and evaluated. This includes children who are homeless, wards of the state, and those attending private schools, whether or not they are affiliated with a religious institution. The emphasis is on universal screening and a low threshold for referral when a suspected disability is present. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on parental requests for evaluation. This fails to meet the proactive mandate of child find, as it places the entire burden on parents to recognize and articulate a need for services, which may not always be possible, especially for very young children or those with subtle disabilities. Alabama law requires school districts to initiate the process when a suspected disability is identified, not wait for a formal parental request. Another incorrect approach is to limit the child find efforts to only currently enrolled public school students. This directly contravenes the Alabama Administrative Code's requirement to identify all eligible children within the district's jurisdiction, including those attending private schools or not attending school at all. The obligation to locate and evaluate extends beyond the traditional student population. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to dismiss concerns about a child's development or potential disability based on the absence of a formal diagnosis from a private provider. While private evaluations can be helpful, the school district has an independent obligation to conduct its own evaluation if a suspected disability is identified through its screening or referral processes, regardless of prior diagnostic information. The child find mandate is about identifying potential needs and conducting evaluations to determine eligibility for services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and Alabama law. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves prioritizing the legal mandate of child find, understanding the specific requirements of Alabama's administrative code, and employing a proactive, inclusive, and systematic approach to identification and evaluation. This means establishing clear procedures for screening, referral, and evaluation that are accessible to all children within the district, and ensuring that all school personnel are trained to recognize and report potential indicators of disability. When in doubt, The professional decision-making process should err on the side of caution and initiate the evaluation process to ensure no child is overlooked. Question 10. The review process indicates a need to assess the financial implications of landmark Supreme Court decisions on Alabama school districts. If the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Board of Education 1954 and subsequent desegregation cases have led to a mandate for Alabama school districts to equalize per-pupil spending across formerly segregated schools. And a district's current per-pupil expenditure is $7,500, but the mandated equalization target is $8,250 per pupil, and the district has 5,000 students. What is the minimum additional annual funding required to meet this equalization mandate? Option A, $1,250,000. Option B, $2,500,000. Option C, $5,000,000. Option D, $3,750,000. The correct answer is D, $3,750,000. Explanation. The review process indicates a need to assess understanding of how landmark Supreme Court cases, specifically those impacting education law in Alabama, influence financial allocations and resource distribution within school districts. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires not only knowledge of historical legal precedents, but also the ability to apply those precedents to practical, quantitative decision-making processes. Misinterpreting or ignoring the financial implications of these rulings can lead to inequitable resource distribution, legal challenges, and ultimately, harm to students. Careful judgment is required to balance legal mandates with fiscal realities. The best professional practice involves a thorough analysis of the financial impact of landmark Supreme Court decisions on Alabama's public education system. This includes quantifying the potential costs associated with desegregation remedies, equalization of resources, or special education mandates stemming from such cases. For instance, if a ruling mandates specific per-pupil spending levels or requires the provision of certain services, the district must calculate the total financial obligation and integrate it into its budget. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligations imposed by the Supreme Court and ensures that the district's financial planning is compliant and equitable. Alabama law, influenced by federal court mandates derived from Supreme Court decisions, requires that school districts allocate resources in a manner that remedies past inequities and provides a constitutionally sound education for all students. Ignoring these financial implications would be a direct violation of these legal and ethical obligations. An approach that prioritizes immediate operational needs over the financial obligations stemming from landmark Supreme Court cases is professionally unacceptable. This failure to account for legally mandated expenditures, such as those related to desegregation or special education services, can result in a deficit that jeopardizes the district's ability to provide essential educational programs. Such an approach disregards the foundational principles of equity and access established by these critical legal precedents. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to allocate funds based solely on historical budget allocations without considering the financial impact of Supreme Court rulings. This method fails to adapt to evolving legal requirements and can perpetuate existing inequities. Landmark decisions often necessitate a reallocation of resources to address specific disparities, and a static budgeting process will not achieve this. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the perceived needs of specific schools without a quantitative assessment of the financial implications of Supreme Court mandates is also flawed. While understanding local needs is important, it must be integrated with a rigorous calculation of legally required expenditures. Failing to perform these calculations means the district cannot accurately determine its financial capacity to meet its legal obligations, potentially leading to underfunding of mandated programs. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. First, identify all relevant landmark Supreme Court decisions impacting Alabama education law and their specific mandates. Second, quantify the financial implications of each mandate, considering per-pupil costs, program expenses, and infrastructure needs. Third, integrate these quantified financial obligations into the district's annual budget process, ensuring that sufficient funds are allocated to meet legal requirements. Fourth, Regularly review and update financial projections based on any new legal interpretations or court orders. Question 11. Examination of the data shows that a teacher in an Alabama public school reports to the principal that a student may be in possession of a prohibited item. The principal, without further investigation or observation, decides to search the student's backpack. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the legal standards governing student searches in Alabama, as informed by landmark Supreme Court decisions? Option A. Conduct the search based solely on the teacher's report, assuming the teacher's information is accurate and sufficient justification. Option B. Conduct a routine search of the student's backpack as a standard procedure for any student reported by a teacher, regardless of the nature of the report. Option C. Conduct the search only if the principal has reasonable suspicion, based on specific and articulable facts, that the student has violated or is violating a school rule or law. Option D. Conduct the search because the student exhibited a defiant demeanor when questioned about the teacher's report. The correct answer is C. Conduct the search only if the principal has reasonable suspicion, based on specific and articulable facts, that the student has violated or is violating a school rule or law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires school administrators to balance the need to maintain a safe and orderly learning environment with the constitutional rights of students. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and applying this principle in a school setting, where disciplinary needs are paramount, necessitates careful consideration of established legal precedents. The tension between these competing interests demands a nuanced approach to student searches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a search only when there is reasonable suspicion that the student has violated or is violating a school rule or law. This approach aligns directly with the standard established in New Jersey v. T.L.O. Reasonable suspicion requires specific and articulable facts, which, taken together with rational inferences from those facts, reasonably warrant the intrusion. This standard is less stringent than probable cause but more demanding than a mere hunch or gut feeling. Adhering to this standard protects student rights while allowing school officials to address legitimate disciplinary concerns effectively. Incorrect approaches analysis. Conducting a search based solely on a teacher's unsubstantiated report, without any corroborating evidence or specific observations, fails to meet the reasonable suspicion standard. This approach risks violating a student's Fourth Amendment rights by treating a rumor as sufficient justification for a search. Performing a search as a routine measure for all students entering a particular classroom, regardless of any specific behavior or suspicion, constitutes a generalized search that is not individualized. This broad approach is not supported by the reasonable suspicion standard and would be considered an unreasonable seizure. Initiating a search based on the student's defiant attitude or perceived disrespect, without any indication of contraband or rule violation, relies on subjective interpretation rather than objective facts. While a student's behavior is a factor, it must be linked to a reasonable belief that a rule has been broken or contraband is present to justify a search under T.L.O. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established legal standards. When considering a search, they must ask, do I have specific, articulable facts that, when combined with rational inferences, lead me to reasonably suspect that this student has violated a school rule or law or possesses contraband? This requires gathering information, observing student conduct, and assessing the totality of the circumstances before acting. If reasonable suspicion is not present, the search should not proceed. Question 12. Upon reviewing the situation at an Alabama public high school, a principal receives an anonymous tip suggesting a student is carrying a prohibited item. The principal has no other information or observations to corroborate this tip. Which of the following actions best aligns with the legal standards for student searches in Alabama? Option A. The principal should question the student about the tip, and if the student denies it, assume the tip is false and take no further action. Option B. The principal should gather additional specific and articulable facts to establish reasonable suspicion before conducting any search. Option C. The principal should immediately search the student's backpack based on the anonymous tip to ensure school safety. Option D. The principal should search the student's locker because the tip mentioned the student was seen near their locker earlier. The correct answer is B. The principal should gather additional specific and articulable facts to establish reasonable suspicion before conducting any search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for school administrators in Alabama, balancing the need to maintain a safe and orderly learning environment with the constitutional rights of students. The distinction between reasonable suspicion and probable cause is critical, as actions taken without sufficient legal justification can lead to legal challenges, disciplinary actions against staff, and erosion of trust within the school community. The pressure to act swiftly in potential safety situations can sometimes lead to overreach, making a clear understanding of these legal standards paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a school administrator in Alabama carefully assessing the totality of the circumstances to determine if reasonable suspicion exists before initiating a search of a student's belongings. Reasonable suspicion, as understood within Alabama's educational context and consistent with Fourth Amendment principles applied to schools, requires specific and articulable facts that, taken together with rational inferences from those facts, reasonably warrant an intrusion. This means the administrator must be able to point to concrete observations or reliable information that suggests the student is violating school rules or the law, rather than relying on hunches or generalized suspicions. This approach respects student privacy while allowing for necessary interventions to ensure safety and order. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating a search based solely on a vague rumor from an anonymous source without any corroborating evidence or specific facts would be an unacceptable approach. This fails to meet the standard of reasonable suspicion, as it relies on unsubstantiated information and lacks the articulable facts required by Alabama law and constitutional precedent. Such an action could be deemed an unreasonable search and seizure. Conducting a search because a student appears nervous or is dressed in a manner that deviates from the norm, without any other indicators of wrongdoing, also falls short of the required legal standard. While a student's demeanor can be a factor in a totality of the circumstances analysis, it cannot be the sole basis for reasonable suspicion. This approach relies on subjective interpretation and stereotypes rather than objective, specific facts. Acting on a hunch or a general feeling that a student might be involved in something illicit, without any concrete evidence or specific observations, is a clear violation of the reasonable suspicion standard. This approach is based on intuition rather than a legally defensible justification and exposes the school to significant legal risk. Professional reasoning. School administrators in Alabama should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes gathering specific, articulable facts. When faced with a potential need to search, they should ask, what specific observations have I made? What reliable information have I received? Do these facts, when considered together, create a reasonable belief that a violation has occurred or is about to occur? If the answer is yes, and the facts are specific enough to justify the intrusion, then reasonable suspicion likely exists. If the facts are vague, speculative, or based on generalizations, further investigation or alternative, less intrusive measures should be considered before proceeding with a search. This systematic approach ensures compliance with legal standards and protects the rights of students. Question 13. When evaluating a student's alleged violation of school policy in an Alabama public school, what is the most appropriate course of action for a school administrator to take to ensure compliance with disciplinary requirements and due process rights? Option A. Provide the student with written notification of the alleged violation and the evidence, and offer a meaningful opportunity to respond before imposing any disciplinary action. Option B. Immediately suspend the student from school based on the teacher's initial report to prevent further disruption. Option C. Proceed with expulsion without a formal hearing, assuming the allegations are credible and severe. Option D. Rely solely on the teacher's written statement and impose disciplinary measures without further investigation or student input. The correct answer is A. Provide the student with written notification of the alleged violation and the evidence, and offer a meaningful opportunity to respond before imposing any disciplinary action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the need for swift disciplinary action against a student's fundamental right to due process under Alabama law. Missteps can lead to legal challenges, reputational damage for the school, and potential harm to the student's educational future. The school administrator must navigate the specific procedural requirements mandated by Alabama's education statutes and administrative codes when imposing disciplinary measures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the established disciplinary procedures outlined in the Alabama Administrative Code and relevant school board policies. This means providing the student with timely written notice of the alleged misconduct, detailing the specific rules violated, and the evidence supporting the allegations. Crucially, it requires offering the student a meaningful opportunity to present their side of the story, either through a written statement or an informal hearing, before any disciplinary action is finalized. This approach aligns with the due process guarantees afforded to students in Alabama, ensuring fairness and preventing arbitrary decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately suspend the student based solely on the teacher's report without any further investigation or opportunity for the student to respond. This fails to provide the student with adequate notice and a chance to be heard, violating fundamental due process rights guaranteed under Alabama law. Such an action could be deemed arbitrary and capricious. Another incorrect approach is to impose a severe disciplinary action, such as expulsion, without conducting a formal hearing as required for such serious consequences under Alabama's disciplinary frameworks. While immediate removal from class might be permissible in certain circumstances, a final decision on expulsion necessitates a more robust procedural safeguard, including a formal hearing where evidence is presented, and the student has legal representation if desired. A third incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay evidence or uncorroborated accusations without allowing the student to confront the accuser or present counter-evidence. Alabama's disciplinary processes, while not always mirroring criminal court standards, still require a degree of reliability in evidence and an opportunity for the accused to challenge the basis of the allegations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in educational administration should adopt a systematic decision-making process when faced with disciplinary matters. This process begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Alabama statutes and administrative rules governing student discipline. Upon receiving an allegation, the administrator should gather all available information, assess the severity of the alleged offense, and determine the appropriate procedural steps required. This includes providing clear and timely notice to the student and their parents/guardians, offering a fair opportunity to respond, and ensuring that any disciplinary action taken is supported by evidence and consistent with established policies and legal requirements. Documentation of each step is paramount to demonstrate adherence to due process. Question 14. In an Alabama public high school, a teacher observes a student exhibiting unusual nervousness and repeatedly looking towards their backpack during a test. The teacher has no other specific information or observable evidence suggesting the student is in possession of contraband or cheating materials. Which of the following actions, if any, represents the most appropriate and legally compliant response according to Alabama education law and relevant constitutional principles? Option A. The teacher immediately calls the principal to conduct a full pat-down search of the student based on the teacher's unease. Option B. The teacher confiscates the student's backpack and places it in a secure location until the end of the school day without further immediate inspection. Option C. The teacher approaches the student, discreetly asks the student to open their backpack for inspection, explaining that their behavior has raised concerns about potential academic dishonesty. Option D. The teacher ignores the student's behavior, as there is no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, to avoid any potential accusations of harassment. The correct answer is C. The teacher approaches the student, discreetly asks the student to open their backpack for inspection, explaining that their behavior has raised concerns about potential academic dishonesty. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between maintaining a safe and orderly school environment and respecting students' constitutional rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. School officials in Alabama must navigate this delicate balance, adhering to both established legal precedents and the specific guidelines governing public education within the state. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any intrusion into a student's privacy is justified and conducted in a manner that is least intrusive to their rights. The correct approach involves a school administrator conducting a search based on reasonable suspicion that the student possesses contraband or evidence of a violation of school rules. This standard, established by Supreme Court precedent and applied within Alabama's educational framework, allows for searches when there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that the search will turn up evidence that the student is in violation of school rules. The search must be justified at its inception by reasonable suspicion that the student is in violation of school rules, and the scope of the search must be reasonably related to the circumstances which justify the interference in the first place. This approach prioritizes student safety and school discipline while upholding the constitutional protections afforded to students. An incorrect approach would be for a teacher to conduct a search of a student's backpack solely based on a hunch or a general feeling that the student might be hiding something, without any specific observable facts or information to support this suspicion. This fails to meet the reasonable suspicion standard required by Alabama law and constitutional precedent, potentially leading to a violation of the student's Fourth Amendment rights. Another incorrect approach would be for a principal to order a strip search of a student based on a rumor from another student, without any independent corroboration or a strong, individualized suspicion of serious misconduct. Strip searches are highly intrusive and require a higher level of suspicion, typically probable cause, and even then, must be conducted with extreme caution and adherence to strict protocols to be considered reasonable. Relying solely on unverified rumors falls far short of this standard. A further incorrect approach would be for a school resource officer to conduct a search of a student's locker without any suspicion of wrongdoing, simply as a routine measure to deter potential violations. While lockers are school property, students still retain a degree of privacy interest. Searches of lockers generally require reasonable suspicion that contraband or evidence of a violation will be found. Routine, suspicionless searches of student lockers are not permissible under current Alabama law and constitutional interpretation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific facts and circumstances that give rise to a potential need for a search. This involves gathering observable information, credible reports, or direct evidence. Next, they must assess whether these facts meet the legal standard of reasonable suspicion. If reasonable suspicion exists, the scope and manner of the search must be tailored to the suspected violation and be the least intrusive means necessary to confirm or deny the suspicion. Documentation of the reasons for the search and the procedures followed is crucial for accountability and legal defense. Question 15. Comparative studies suggest that educational institutions often face challenges in navigating student disciplinary procedures. In Alabama, a school administrator receives a report alleging a student engaged in serious misconduct that could warrant expulsion. What is the most legally compliant and ethically sound approach for the administrator to take in initiating the disciplinary process? Option A. Immediately suspend the student and begin the expulsion process based on the initial accusation, assuming the report is accurate. Option B. Inform the student and parents that expulsion is likely and advise them to seek legal counsel before any formal proceedings begin. Option C. Conduct a thorough, impartial investigation. Provide written notice of the charges and evidence to the student and their parents/guardians, and offer an opportunity for a hearing before making any disciplinary decision. Option D. Rely primarily on the student's disciplinary record and the accuser's statement to justify immediate expulsion without further investigation or formal hearing. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, impartial investigation. Provide written notice of the charges and evidence to the student and their parents/guardians, and offer an opportunity for a hearing before making any disciplinary decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation for a school administrator in Alabama. The challenge lies in balancing the need to maintain a safe and orderly learning environment with the fundamental rights of a student to due process and fair treatment. A hasty or procedurally flawed disciplinary action can lead to legal repercussions for the school and district, as well as damage the student's educational trajectory and the school's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any disciplinary action, particularly expulsion, is not only justified by the student's conduct, but also meticulously adheres to the established legal framework in Alabama. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough investigation that meticulously follows the procedures outlined in the Alabama Code, specifically concerning student discipline and expulsion. This includes providing the student and their parents or guardians with written notice of the charges, the evidence supporting them, and the proposed disciplinary action. Crucially, it mandates offering an opportunity for a hearing where the student can present their side of the story, be represented by an advocate, and question witnesses. The decision to expel must be based on substantial evidence and be consistent with district policies and state law, with a clear record of all proceedings maintained. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the due process rights guaranteed to students under Alabama law, ensuring fairness and preventing arbitrary disciplinary actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately suspending and initiating expulsion proceedings based solely on an accusation without conducting a thorough, impartial investigation, or providing the student with the mandated notice and opportunity for a hearing. This fails to uphold the student's right to due process as established by Alabama law, potentially leading to legal challenges and a finding of procedural irregularity. Another incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay or unsubstantiated rumors as the primary basis for expulsion. While information from various sources may be considered, the decision to expel must be supported by credible evidence that can be presented, and if necessary, challenged during the disciplinary process. Alabama's disciplinary framework requires a foundation of substantial evidence for such severe consequences. A third incorrect approach is to fail to provide adequate written notice to the student and their parents or guardians detailing the specific charges, the evidence, and the potential consequences, including the right to a hearing. This omission directly violates the procedural safeguards mandated by Alabama law, rendering any subsequent disciplinary action vulnerable to legal challenge. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must identify the specific conduct and the relevant Alabama code provisions and local district policies governing student discipline and expulsion. Second, they must initiate a prompt and impartial investigation, gathering all relevant facts and evidence. Third, they must ensure all procedural requirements, including written notice and the opportunity for a hearing, are strictly followed. Fourth, they must weigh the evidence objectively and make a decision that is both legally compliant and educationally sound, always prioritizing fairness and due process for the student. Question 16. The investigation demonstrates that Ms. Anya Sharma, a high school English teacher in Montgomery, Alabama, has observed a student, Liam, exhibiting signs of significant emotional distress and has overheard him making concerning statements about his home life. Ms. Sharma is aware that Liam's parents are going through a contentious divorce. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for Ms. Sharma to take under Alabama education law and professional ethical standards? Option A. Ms. Sharma should discreetly observe Liam's behavior without taking any further action, assuming the situation will resolve itself. Option B. Ms. Sharma should immediately document her observations and concerns in writing and report them to the school principal or designated school counselor, following the school's established protocol for student welfare concerns. Option C. Ms. Sharma should directly contact Liam's parents to discuss her observations and offer personal advice on how to navigate their divorce and support Liam. Option D. Ms. Sharma should attempt to counsel Liam herself, offering him a safe space to discuss his feelings about his parents' divorce without involving school administration. Correct answer is B. Ms. Sharma should immediately document her observations and concerns in writing and report them to the school principal or designated school counselor, following the school's established protocol for student welfare concerns. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an educator to balance their duty of care to students with the need to maintain professional boundaries and adhere to school policies, all while navigating a potentially sensitive personal situation involving a student. Careful judgment is required to ensure the student's well-being is prioritized without compromising ethical standards or legal obligations under Alabama law. The best professional approach involves discreetly reporting the observed behavior to the appropriate school administrator or counselor, as mandated by school policy and generally accepted ethical guidelines for educators in Alabama. This approach ensures that the situation is handled by individuals trained to address such concerns, who can then initiate formal support mechanisms for the student and conduct a thorough, objective investigation. Alabama's education law and professional ethics emphasize the importance of reporting suspected student distress or inappropriate relationships to designated authorities to protect student welfare and maintain professional integrity. This aligns with the educator's responsibility to act in the best interest of the student and to uphold the standards of the profession, An incorrect approach would be to directly confront the student's parent without first informing school administration. This bypasses established reporting protocols, potentially escalates the situation inappropriately, and could lead to misunderstandings or accusations of overstepping professional boundaries. It also fails to involve the school's support system, which is crucial for providing comprehensive assistance to the student. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed behavior, assuming it is a minor issue or not the educator's concern. This abdication of responsibility is ethically unsound and potentially violates the educator's duty of care under Alabama law, which requires educators to be vigilant for signs of student distress or harm and to take appropriate action. Finally, attempting to counsel the student directly about the suspected personal issues without proper training or authorization from school administration is also an incorrect approach. Educators are not typically licensed counselors, and such actions could inadvertently cause harm to the student or create a situation where the educator is seen as overstepping their professional role, potentially leading to disciplinary action or legal complications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes student safety and well-being, adhere strictly to institutional policies and relevant state laws, in this case, Alabama education law, and maintains professional boundaries. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or designated school official is always the most prudent course of action. Question 17. Analysis of a situation involving a student at an Alabama public high school who is accused of academic dishonesty. The school principal, upon receiving a report from a teacher, immediately suspends the student for 5 days and assigns a failing grade for the semester, without informing the student or their parents of the specific allegations or providing an opportunity for a hearing. Which of the following approaches best upholds the student's due process rights under Alabama law? Option A. Inform the student verbally about the accusation and proceed with the disciplinary action after a brief discussion with the student. Option B. Rely solely on the teacher's assessment of the situation and impose the disciplinary consequences without further investigation or communication with the student or their parents. Option C. Provide the student and their parents with written notice detailing the specific allegations of academic dishonesty, the evidence supporting these allegations, and the date, time, and location of an informal hearing where the student can present their perspective and any mitigating factors. Option D. Immediately implement the disciplinary action based on the teacher's report to deter future misconduct and maintain academic integrity. The correct answer is C. Provide the student and their parents with written notice detailing the specific allegations of academic dishonesty, the evidence supporting these allegations, and the date, time, and location of an informal hearing where the student can present their perspective and any mitigating factors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a student's fundamental right to due process when facing disciplinary action that could impact their educational standing. School administrators must navigate the complex requirements of the Alabama Code and establish legal precedents to ensure fairness and prevent potential legal challenges. The challenge lies in balancing the need for swift disciplinary action with the imperative to provide adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves providing the student and their parents or guardians with clear, written notice of the specific charges, the evidence supporting those charges, and the date, time, and location of a hearing. This approach aligns directly with the due process requirements outlined in Alabama law, which mandate that individuals facing disciplinary action be informed of the allegations and have a meaningful opportunity to present their side of the story. This ensures transparency and adherence to legal standards, safeguarding the student's rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to provide written notice of the specific charges and evidence is a significant regulatory failure. This deprives the student of the ability to adequately prepare a defense and violates the fundamental principle of notice required by due process. Conducting a hearing without allowing the student or their representative to present evidence or question witnesses is another critical regulatory failure. This denies the student a meaningful opportunity to be heard, a cornerstone of due process protections. Imposing disciplinary action solely based on a teacher's verbal report without any formal investigation or opportunity for the student to respond constitutes a severe due process violation. This bypasses established procedures and fails to provide the student with a fair hearing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in education must always prioritize adherence to legal mandates, particularly those concerning student rights. When faced with disciplinary situations, a systematic approach is crucial. This involves 1. Identifying the specific allegations and potential consequences. 2. Consulting relevant Alabama code provisions and school district policies regarding student discipline and due process. 3. Ensuring all procedural requirements such as written notice and a fair hearing are meticulously followed. 4. Documenting all steps taken to create a clear record of compliance. This structured approach minimizes the risk of legal challenges and upholds the ethical obligation to treat students fairly. Question 18. Consider a scenario in an Alabama public school where a student with an identified emotional disturbance, whose Individualized Education Program, EAP, outlines specific behavioral interventions, engages in a physical altercation with another student that results in injury. The school principal, believing the behavior to be intentional and not related to the student's disability, proceeds to suspend the student for 5 days without consulting the student's parents or convening a manifestation determination review (MDR) team. Which of the following actions by the principal best aligns with Alabama's regulatory framework for manifestation determination reviews? Option A. Conduct an informal discussion with the student's special education teacher to gauge their opinion on whether the behavior was a manifestation, and then make a unilateral decision regarding the suspension. Option B. Immediately convene a manifestation determination review (MDR) team, including the student's parents, to review all relevant information and determine if the student's behavior was a manifestation of their disability, and then proceed with disciplinary action based on the team's findings. Option C. Proceed with the 5-day suspension as initially planned, assuming the behavior was intentional and not a manifestation of the disability, and inform the parents of the disciplinary action taken. Option D. Delay the manifestation determination review (MDR) until after the suspension period has concluded to allow for a more thorough investigation of the incident. The correct answer is B. Immediately convene a manifestation determination review (MDR) team, including the student's parents, to review all relevant information and determine if the student's behavior was a manifestation of their disability, and then proceed with disciplinary action based on the team's findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a school administrator to navigate the complex requirements of a manifestation determination review (MDR) under Alabama law, specifically concerning a student with a disability who has engaged in behavior that may warrant disciplinary action. The administrator must balance the need for appropriate disciplinary measures with the legal protections afforded to students with disabilities under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and Alabama's specific implementation of these federal mandates. Failure to conduct a proper MDR can lead to legal challenges, financial penalties, and disruption of the student's education. The administrator's judgment is critical in ensuring procedural compliance and substantive fairness. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves convening a full MDR team, including the student's parents or guardians, within the legally mandated time frame. This team must review all relevant information, including the student's IEP, disciplinary records, and any observations by school personnel, to determine if the student's behavior was a manifestation of their disability. Alabama law, mirroring federal IDEA requirements, mandates this collaborative review process to ensure that disciplinary actions are not imposed for behavior that is a direct result of the student's disability. This approach upholds the student's rights and ensures that the school's response is appropriate and legally sound. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with disciplinary action without convening the full MDR team and involving the parents. This bypasses the core procedural safeguards of the MDR process, violating Alabama's adherence to IDEA. Another incorrect approach is to unilaterally decide that the behavior was not a manifestation of the disability without a thorough review of all relevant documentation and input from the team. This demonstrates a failure to engage in the required collaborative and evidence-based determination. Finally, delaying the MDR process beyond the statutory timeframe, even if a review is eventually conducted, is also a procedural violation that undermines the student's rights and the integrity of the review. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach MDRs by first understanding the specific legal requirements under Alabama law and federal IDEA. This involves identifying the composition of the MDR team, the timeline for conducting the review, and the types of information that must be considered. When a student with a disability exhibits behavior that may warrant disciplinary action, the immediate step should be to initiate the MDR process. This includes notifying parents and scheduling a meeting with the designated team. During the review, the team should systematically examine the relationship between the student's disability and the behavior in question, using all available data. If the behavior is determined to be a manifestation, the disciplinary action must be modified, and the student's IEP may need to be reviewed and revised. If it is not a manifestation, the student may be subject to the same disciplinary procedures as students without disabilities, but the IEP team must still consider whether services are needed for the student to address the behavior. Question 19. During the evaluation of a student's right to express themselves through personal items brought to school in Alabama, what is the most appropriate course of action for a principal when a student is observed wearing a T-shirt with a slogan that some students find offensive, but which does not appear to be lewd, vulgar, or substantially disruptive to the educational environment? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the slogan's content and context, assessing whether it violates established Alabama law regarding student speech, such as by being substantially disruptive to the educational mission or infringing on the rights of others, before taking any action. Option B. Allow the student to continue wearing the T-shirt without comment, regardless of any potential impact on other students or the learning environment. Option C. Consult with parents and seek their permission to remove the T-shirt, even if the student's expression does not meet the legal threshold for restriction. Option D. Immediately confiscate the T-shirt and issue a disciplinary referral based on the complaint of offense, citing general school policy against disruptive attire. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the slogan's content and context, assessing whether it violates established Alabama law regarding student speech, such as by being substantially disruptive to the educational mission or infringing on the rights of others, before taking any action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing a student's right to privacy and freedom of expression with the school's responsibility to maintain a safe and orderly learning environment. The principal must navigate potential conflicts between these rights and the specific regulations governing student conduct and expression within Alabama public schools. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to legal challenges, damage to the school community, and infringement on student rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the student's expression against the established legal standards for student speech in Alabama. This means considering whether the expression is disruptive, substantially interferes with the educational mission, or infringes on the rights of others, as interpreted by Alabama law and relevant court precedents. The principal should engage in a fact-specific inquiry, documenting the nature of the expression, its context, and any evidence of disruption or potential disruption. This approach prioritizes adherence to legal frameworks, ensuring that any disciplinary action is narrowly tailored and justified, thereby protecting both student rights and the school's legitimate interests. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately confiscate the student's personal belongings and impose disciplinary action solely based on the content of the expression without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the student's right to free expression, which is protected under the First Amendment and further defined by Alabama law, unless it meets specific legal thresholds for restriction. Such an action presumes a violation without due process or a proper assessment of disruption. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the expression entirely, even if there is credible evidence that it is causing substantial disruption or creating a hostile environment for other students. While schools must protect student speech, this protection is not absolute and does not extend to expressions that demonstrably undermine the educational process or violate the rights of others. Failing to address such issues abdicates the school's responsibility to maintain a safe and effective learning environment. A further incorrect approach is to rely on personal opinions or general school policies that are not specifically aligned with Alabama's legal standards for student speech. School administrators must base their decisions on established legal principles and precedents, not on subjective interpretations or policies that may overreach their authority. This can lead to arbitrary enforcement and legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific legal rights and responsibilities of students within the governing jurisdiction, in this case, Alabama. This involves consulting relevant statutes, administrative codes, and case law pertaining to student speech and conduct. The next step is to gather all relevant facts about the specific situation, including the nature of the expression, its context, and any observed or potential impact. This factual assessment should then be rigorously applied to the legal standards. If the expression appears to fall within protected speech, the school should generally allow it. If it potentially crosses the line into unprotected speech, e.g., substantially disruptive, lewd, or promoting illegal activity, the school must have a clear, documented rationale for any intervention, ensuring it is the least restrictive means necessary to address the legitimate concern. This process emphasizes due process, factual accuracy, and legal compliance. Question 20. Research into the athletic programs of the Oakwood School District in Alabama reveals that 55% of the student body is female and 45% is male. The district offers 10 athletic teams for male students and 8 athletic teams for female students. The total number of participation slots for male athletes is 225, and for female athletes is 144. If the total number of athletic scholarships awarded is 30, with 20 awarded to male athletes and 10 to female athletes, what is the percentage of athletic opportunities, participation slots, for female students relative to their enrollment percentage? Option A. Count the number of sports offered to each sex and determine if the number of sports is equal. Option B. Calculate the total dollar amount spent on male athletics and compare it to the total dollar amount spent on female athletics. Option C. Calculate the percentage of female student enrollment and compare it to the percentage of female participation slots. If the percentages are not substantially proportionate, the district may be in violation of Title Roman IX, unless it can demonstrate a good faith effort to expand opportunities for female students. Option D. Assert that the district's budget limitations prevent full compliance with Title Roman IX proportionality requirements. The correct answer is C. Calculate the percentage of female student enrollment and compare it to the percentage of female participation slots. If the percentages are not substantially proportionate, the district may be in violation of Title Roman IX unless it can demonstrate a good faith effort to expand opportunities for female students. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a school district to balance its legal obligations under Title Roman IX with the practical realities of budget allocation and resource management. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring equitable opportunities for athletic participation for both sexes, even when financial constraints exist. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply Title Roman IX proportionality provisions accurately. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive statistical analysis of the district's athletic programs. This approach correctly assesses whether the proportion of athletic opportunities offered to male and female students aligns with their respective enrollment numbers. Specifically, it requires calculating the percentage of male and female students in the district and comparing these percentages to the percentage of athletic scholarships and participation slots allocated to each sex. If a significant disparity exists, the district must demonstrate that it is making a good faith effort to expand opportunities for the underrepresented sex, or that the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex are not being fully accommodated. This aligns directly with the regulatory framework of Title Roman IX, which mandates equal athletic opportunities and prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the total dollar amount spent on male versus female athletics. While financial considerations are relevant, Title Roman IX primary focus is on the availability of opportunities, not just the expenditure. Simply spending an equal amount of money does not guarantee equal opportunities if, for example, one sex has significantly more participants but fewer overall opportunities or scholarships. This approach fails to address the core requirement of proportionality in participation. Another incorrect approach would be to argue that since the district offers more sports for one sex, the disparity is justified. Title Roman IX does not permit a simple numerical count of sports offered as the sole determinant of compliance. The regulations require an analysis of participation numbers, scholarship opportunities, and other factors to ensure that the proportionality of opportunities reflects the proportionality of student interest and abilities. This approach ignores the quantitative and qualitative aspects of opportunity. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to claim that budget limitations automatically exempt the district from Title Roman IX requirements. While financial constraints are a practical reality, they do not excuse a district from its legal obligation to provide equitable athletic opportunities. The district must still demonstrate that it is making good faith efforts to comply with Title Roman IX, even within its budget. This approach misinterprets the scope of Title Roman IX enforcement and the district's responsibilities. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the district's athletic programs against Title Roman IX regulations. This includes gathering accurate enrollment data, participation statistics, scholarship information, and any other relevant data. A quantitative analysis, such as the one described as the correct approach, is crucial for identifying potential disparities. If disparities are found, the district must then explore all available options to achieve compliance, including program expansion, resource reallocation, and demonstrating a good faith effort to accommodate the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. Consulting with legal counsel specializing in education law and Title Roman IX is also a critical step in ensuring compliance.